Hey, good morning and welcome to P.W. Grocer's Environmental Echo. I am Paul Boyce, CEO and President of P.W. Grocer and your host of this podcast. I want to welcome our guests today, which are going to be a couple of my coworkers and employees. I've got Kris Almskog, our Senior Vice President and Director of Business Development with me today, as well as Derek Ersbak, our Vice President and Director of Engineering. Just want to introduce these guys a little bit, but before I get to that, just to give you an idea of what this podcast is going to be about today, it's a little bit different. We've been getting some inquiries to do some stuff about P.W. Grocer, so we're going to focus on the firm itself this time, and what we've been up to, what we do, where we're planning on going in the future, and all that fun stuff. But before we get started, as always, I just like to let our listeners know the best way to get a hold of us, in case you guys have questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas on anything, including this podcast and future ones, or if you're interested in being a guest and you want to reach out, best way to do that is to get a hold of us on our website, which is www.pwgrocer.com/podcast. So with that, let's get started. Kris, Derek, thank you for joining me today.
Our pleasure.
This should be an interesting topic. But before I dive in with you guys, I will start with just a little bit of background on the firm for our listeners who've been inquiring. The firm was founded roughly 35 years ago, towards the end of 1990 by Paul Grocer, our founder. Back then, it was just a sole practitioner, one man working off his kitchen table or down in his basement. Firm has slowly grown over the years. We're now not just one, we're about 75 employees. We've got multiple offices. Our headquarters is here in Long Island, which is Bohemia, and we've got a fairly decent-sized city office in Manhattan. We've got another office upstate in Saratoga Springs, and then we've got a couple of smaller offices, Monticello, which is also upstate New York, and we've got Marty out there in Syracuse, which we also tend to claim as an office. Right, guys?
That's right.
Yeah. But that growth over the years, it's been steady. We've had some small acquisitions along the way, but to focus on some of our core services, we say we are an environmental engineering and consulting firm, and that is true to its what we're saying there. We focus on the environment, water, land, air, all that fun stuff, and everything in between. Just so people do know, we've got a variety of licensed professionals here on staff. That includes about 10 professional engineers licensed in New York State. Many of those PEs have multiple licenses in other jurisdictions or other states, including myself. And then we've even got more professional geologists or PGs on staff. I think we've got a total of 14 New York State licensed professional geologists, which is saying a lot. We've probably got one of the bigger PG group outfits, I guess, in the whole state as far as I know. It's quite impressive for a firm our size. Also, I want to let our listeners know that we are an ESOP, right? What does that mean? Employee Share Ownership Program, right? And that program owns about 55+% of the firm. That means the ownership is in the hands of the employees, so everybody's got a vested interest here that works for us or is employed by us. There is a vesting period and all that fun stuff, but eventually you do get some ownership. And when it's time to retire and move on, you do get your shares get bought out. So it's good. As we grow, that grows, and it's it's inspirational to people to put in the effort and make this a positive investment for themselves. We're also involved with numerous engineering and geology and other types of professional organizations. First one that always comes to mind for us is ACEC, which is the American Council of Engineering Companies. Great organization. We're also part of New York State Certified Professional Geologist. There's all sorts of brownfields and other engineering organizations like ASCE, AWWA. I mean, I could go on and on with all the acronyms and what they mean, but I just want to let our listeners know that P.W. Grocer is actively involved with many, many organizations in terms of participation and being involved on boards and all that fun stuff. And lastly, before we get into what we're all about at here P.W. Grocer is within the last 7 or 8 months we have become a DPC. We had two firms, an Inc. and a PC. We've consolidated that now, and we've become a Design Professionals Corporation, which is a little bit of a different ownership structure, mainly to accommodate the ESOP with ownership of professional corporation. But what does that mean to our clients? It means you're going to get more buy-in from our employees to work even harder for you with the ESOP and the DPC, but in terms of our services, our responsiveness, the staff, it means there's absolutely no change. It's just a little bit of an ownership change and a name change, all right? But with that, guys, I hope I covered it quickly and succinctly, and, what we wanted to touch on, but I do want to get you guys involved with the types of projects, services, the clients, and all the good stuff that we do as a firm, industry-wide here on Long Island and all the other areas that we work. So let me just back up a little bit. We do have 3 different technical branches. All right, I've got Derek here who heads up our engineering group. We also have a compliance group, and we've got an environmental group. So we're going to touch a little bit on all of those, and hopefully these guys can really help shed some light so our listeners get a better appreciation of who we are, what we do, where we're going. So let's get started, guys. It's enough of me. I could rattle all day, and I'm sure nobody wants to hear that. But let's start with our compliance unit, right? Kris used to be, head that up. Let's talk a little bit about some of the services and clients that we work for. What do you think?
I would love to. I'm Kris Almskog, a professional geologist. I've been with PWGC for 28 wonderful years, and I've been lucky enough to get involved in numerous types of projects, skill sets, and so we threw this idea together to kind of introduce a number of our main skill sets to you, the viewer, and so what kind of projects we get involved in, the types of clients. So I was leading the compliance group until recently, and I had my hands involved in a number of projects. And we'll go over a few and kind of talk and have a conversation a little bit about what we do. And one of the big things we've done in compliance is kind of material management. That's having to do with both aggregate. We've represented a number of mining, quarry sites, also concrete, asphalt facilities, as well as recycling plants and facilities, and also dredging projects. And in these projects, we get involved. We do everything from planning to investigation to permitting. And a lot of these clients we keep for decades. And a lot of it's really strategic thinking about what they're doing now, what their short-term goals are, and what they might be looking to do in 10 plus years down the line. It makes it very interesting. I mean, these clients are with us for the long haul. We develop a really good relationship, a really good trust, because it's a long-term kind of strategic thinking for these clients. So the mining, we represent the clients, Long Island, the Lower Catskills area, up in the capital region, out to Rochester, and even further west. Mining is a very, very regulated industry in New York State. There's a lot of investigation, a lot of planning, a lot of oversight, and design that goes into developing and operating a successful, environmentally, friendly mine site. The reason for mine sites, is basically to produce aggregate that go into concrete, that go into asphalt, that build our roads, that build our foundations, our walkways, our sewer pipes, and everything in between, as well as replenishment of beaches and things like that. So the mining industry and the aggregate industry, it touches every aspect of construction, throughout the state. So it's an integral part. And we've been lucky enough to work with some of the largest aggregate companies in the state. Some groups like Peckham Industries, Roanoke Sand and Gravel, Quorum Materials, and some others, throughout the state. So that's been a really, really great kind of client base for us over the past several decades, and it continues to grow. And with that, we really, one of our strengths is, just our relationships with both our clients, with the attorneys who represent this industry, with the trade groups. That's New York Construction Materials, groups like Long Island Contractors Association, who support these industries because of the important work that they do, and also with the regulators. DEC regulates the industry heavily, and we have a good rapport with DEC, and so we could really kind of talk about the benefits of certain projects and look at the science. So that's one of the bigger client groups that we have in compliance. There's also what we call, falls under Part 360. That's a New York State DEC, section. That has to do with recycling of organic material, recycling of construction and demolition material, concrete, asphalt. And, it's overlooked a lot, but recycling of these materials is basically the largest recycling effort in the state, in New York. There's more volume of that type of material that's being recycled and diverted from landfills than people really realize. And a lot of these materials are used over and over and over again. Once you have a building demolished, or once you have a storm and trees are blown down, this material has to go somewhere, and it's basically the industry has found ways to repurpose and reuse this material, so we don't have to take virgin materials, and we continue to look for ways to recycle and provide efficiencies and useful products, throughout the state. So with that, and I want to go back and forth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There are a lot of things that you guys might even have questions about that we don't.
Absolutely love the mining guys. They're all very good people, Sometimes they do get a bad rap, but even early on, one of our first podcast guests on the Environmental Echo was Jim Barker from Roanoke Sand and Gravel. You're not going to meet a nicer guy.
Another area that compliance has dealt with over the past few decades has been marine permitting. And this has to do with issues such as dredging, bulkheading, and this is again, mostly for commerce and things like that, to open up waterways to allow for, marine traffic, emergency response. Again, it's a very heavily regulated task and part of construction, because there's potential that the sediments might be impacted. So we've gotten heavily involved in that over the past few decades, having to do with design of marine projects, and then the permitting and assisting both municipal and private clients, get through the both planning, permitting, bidding, and then the back end, which sometimes is even the most trickiest part, is what do you do with these sediments? Because there are such strict regulations, we need to ensure that sediments are properly handled, managed, and it's not taken for granted. And occasionally we look for opportunities to take these materials, possibly reuse them locally if they meet certain criteria. Other times they do need to be disposed of properly. So we do marine permitting and design work, and bid support and construction administration throughout the state. Projects up in the Albany area, New York City, Long Island. And we work with numerous municipalities and private industry, and with some of the larger marine contractors as well. Sometimes they pull us in. One of the contractors just in the past year, we worked with company H&L as they were doing large-scale project along Fire Island, replenishing the beaches, and they had us involved in parts. We pulled our engineering group involved because they were doing walkways over the newly formed berm that they dredged out. So even that outreach, because some of these connections that we make and our responsiveness to get out to some of these projects. So the marine services has been, huge, and a lot of us are on the water, so we know what it takes to kind of get out there, and most of these projects are done in the dead of winter, usually tight time frames. So with a lot of clients who come to us talking about dredging, we set their expectations up that this is something that's a multi-year approach, and we try and put it in our client's head that you need to plan, again, not just for what you want done now, but keep it in the back of your mind that you're going to need to dredge again possibly in a few years, and you want to keep those permits going and alive. It'll save you hassle in the future by updating them and resubmitting, so you can do it when you need to dredge. You have the permits available. And also we've developed a decent rapport with the Army Corps of Engineers, and have that, kind of some relationship with them on some of their projects. We're trying to get further involved with what they're doing, and looking for ways to recycle a lot more of the dredge material that comes from these projects. Other states, such as New Jersey, they look for more beneficial ways. So we're working with the Army Corps and with DEC at looking at beneficial reuse options. We've done this with a few pond projects where we've recycled and reused the sediment for basically for additional habitat. Occasionally we did one project where we recycled the material to put on a nearby farm because it had numerous nutrients in it from runoff, and that reduced the amount of fertilizer the farm needed to buy and spread locally as well. So that's another area of compliance that our compliance group has worked on.
And again, we've had those guys on. We've had some of those contractors on as podcast guests.
Yeah, definitely. And feel free to go back and review some of those while you're at it. One of the more recent ventures we've gotten into in compliance has been with, and this, again, one of the things about our company that I really appreciate, is that even though we have these different units, the company and the staff work very well across units, because there's no one project that that we just require one person to kind of solve. We are constantly talking across the aisle, over the wall, to a different office, to kind of come up with what's the best solution for each problem. And a lot of times it involves people from all three different working units to kind of get involved in a project. And so some of the things we've been doing recently have been in the energy market, having to do with solar and battery storage, community solar projects throughout the state, which require issues. We use our wetlands crew. We have a dedicated wetlands crew that we kind of developed over the past few years because of new regulations. And a lot of these solar projects, the wetlands crew is evaluating the property for where could it possibly develop, where could it not, and dealing with the appropriate regulatory agencies. We look at our geotech of these sites. What's the slope? What's kind of what kind of anchoring systems can go into the solar panels and the community solar farm. We look at the grade and how much cut and fill, if they're going to grade this to get the most effective slope on the hillside, how much material needs to be moved, and can that material be leveled off on the site so none, we have a net neutral, nothing goes, nothing comes on, or minimize. And with those things, then we also have our SECRA group that looks at the, again, some of the additional environmental concerns having to do with visual and what we call the birds and the bees, but, habitat issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, issues with, bats and certain insects, reptiles, things that have to be reviewed before we go into these projects. So we're lucky enough in this firm to have a lot of those experts, again, because we do have such a wide and diverse kind of technical staff. What we bring to the client quite frequently is it's a one-stop shopping. We have a lot of what they need in-house, and that takes a lot of pressure off the client from being their own, GC. They bring us in, and we could kind of solve a lot of their issues, such as on these solar projects, where we've been going through the state, talking at public meetings, going to town board meetings, and getting site plan approval for these sites, in conjunction with what the state is trying to do with their sustainability regs and their goals. So we've been very instrumental. That part has been growing tremendously, and now some of these clients are also moving into the battery storage arena. And that's controversial in some areas of the state. There was a new part of the New York State Fire Code, which was updated just recently, new rules for battery storage. So we do think that's going to be taking off as well, both in throughout the state and in parts of Long Island as well. So we've gotten involved in that. And then there's some of the traditional compliance issues that we've dealt with, having to do with, stormwater runoff, wastewater effluent from industrial facilities that's made up a lot of these industrial sites. There's certain requirements they need to meet with their stormwater going off the property into local water bodies. And it's a tricky thing to understand. And so we get involved with a lot of industrial clients and help them navigate these rules. Sometimes we're sampling for them and dealing with the regulators to kind of explain to the clients what they need to do, what best management practices need to go in. And then when we see an issue, again, we work with the engineering group in order to design something that's going to be effective, for their site to ensure they stay in compliance with the regs. They keep going forward with business. Business isn't stopped. They can keep making money at the same time ensuring that they're meeting regulations. Another area of clientele we've worked with have been the hospital systems, with the storage of chemicals, with the storage of certain wastes, and with effluent discharges into sewer districts and things like that. There's a lot of compliance issues that hospitals deal with. We've dealt with things like Legionella and occasionally, spills in hospitals their tank systems, with emergency water supply issues. So we work very closely with a number of healthcare systems, and they're ever expanding, buying new properties, and we're looking at the new properties for them on an environmental standpoint to see if any indoor air qualities exist, if there are mold issues, lead issues, things like that as they expand their operations. So hospitals, we have a number of on-call contracts, and we get involved with things like for Northwell Health System, for Mount Sinai, and several other hospital systems.
Catholic Health, New York Presbyterian, and all of them.
Wonderful clients, and again, with their expansion, it's again, we've worked with these clients for decades, and because we've been responsive to when they need us, and again, we think about what their short and long-term issues are going to be, and we're also very conscious to costs and things like that, and we work with them to figure out how do we give them what they need, and trim down areas, when it's not needed. So they're another big client in the compliance arena that we work with.
You have covered it pretty thoroughly, Kris. I mean, those are all very diverse and interesting topics, of also diverse clientele, and we can speak in terms of private, municipal, and everything in between. But, we also do a lot of work for institutional clients, campuses and colleges and universities, where we cover everything you just mentioned, maybe not so much marine design and stuff on a college campus, but everything else. I mean, we could go on and on, but it is diverse. We do have a lot of different backgrounds here at P.W. Grosser, as Kris mentioned, and the collaboration amongst the staff is fantastic. I've never seen anything like it, really. Everybody's got each other's back. They're willing to lend a hand. We're trying to, there's really no competition amongst the units. It is one firm, even though we're kind of divided that way, but it really is unified. So, and being a leader and to watch that take place, it's such a tremendous feeling. You feel so proud, can't speak highly enough of our staff. So let's shift over to engineering. Derek, you've been awfully quiet over here for the last half hour or so.
Sure. Before we do that, some things for compliance, I had some questions for.
All right.
With the mining and aggregates, it always gets bad press, or not in my backyard, especially on Long Island. How do we educate people of how safe it is and the benefits?
Slowly. We've worked with a lot of regional or local associations, trade associations, contractor associations, to kind of work with them so they could get the word out. We've also presented to numerous local and state, legislators, assembly people about the properties, and have offered sites and to explain. And a lot of these sites, there is routine and long-term groundwater monitoring that have gone into them in order for them to get their permits to begin with. And so we kind of go over that data too with the locals. One of the things we've seen recently that we've tried additional outreach to some of the environmental groups in the area before a new permit modification is coming up, to try and have them understand what's going on at the site, because there is a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of false information out in the social media world. So we realize that we can't fight that in social media. We need to get, what we've seen is get the people who are in charge of those groups, be willing to show them the site and talk to them and share the data, and that works somewhat. But we need to continue to do a better job and get as far ahead of it as possible, because the narrative, the anti-mining mindset has already been built up. A lot of it's based on false information, so we need time to kind of adjust that, because again, the industry, a lot of people don't understand, but the industry, it's not as if they're making a luxury. They're making something that's used to improve our roads, build our foundations for our buildings, and just things that go into the general infrastructure that we all enjoy. And so, yes, there are always ways to make things better. And we encourage, meaningful input. But, I think it's the environmental groups and getting in front of them early enough is the key to starting to change some of the narrative. Yeah. Good question.
You had Anything else, Derek?
I would say with the dredging, reuse of dredged materials can often be difficult because what you're getting at in dredging is such fine material. It doesn't always, go well into construction products. But from a story that I remember, we had 50,000 cubic yards of really fine, not the best suitable material, but we were able to reuse it by amending it with other aggregate materials. And all of a sudden we turned 50,000 into 75,000 yards that was good for, the property rather than disposing of all that material.
Yep. Usually structurally when you dredge, you a lot of times have very, very fine soils, organics, and it doesn't have a lot of structural qualities. So as a result, you can either amend that. The one project I was talking about, we put material on a farm and tilled it into the top few inches of the soil, and that was a suitable solution. But other times we do blend in sandier materials to bring up the structural component slightly. This way it's more usable in a variety of ways. And that's something, again, there are limited resources for disposal of these. And it's a shame to take a resource and put it in the dump. We should be continually looking at ways to recycle, reuse, and reduce, what we're generating and look for the reuse option. Good question.
Yep. And
Great question.
With the landfills filling up, recycling is going to have to be a priority.
That is correct. We're running out of space for it.
Yep.
So we've got to figure out what to do with it. Yes.
As part of the Part 360 initiative here, years ago, we have hired people who used to work at DEC who know the regs, and we've grown up, our market in that recycling sector, the concrete, asphalt, organics, and we're starting to kind of touch on some transfer facilities. So we are getting into the realm of assisting several waste management firms. We have a large client. We do work for waste management, up in the capital region, evaluating some of those things. And down on Long Island, we're looking at things for certain clients having to do with rail and shipping, possibly shipping materials in and out by rail. So it is something that we are involved in, and we see that area of business greatly increasing over the next 5 to 10 years.
Fantastic. Folks, I want to thank you for listening this morning. This is P.W. Grocer's Environmental Echo. We are doing a little bit of a show here on P.W. Grocer just to give you guys a little more insight into who we are, what we do, and as I said before, where we're trying to take this thing. But again, if you want to get a hold of us, just as I said earlier, best way to get a hold of us is that website, www.pwgrocer.com/podcast. All right, and again, our guest this morning, Kris Almskog, our Senior VP and Director of Business Development, and our Vice President and Director of Engineering, Derek Ersbak. And again, I'm Paul Boyce, the President and CEO of PWGC, and I thank you guys for joining us. And please tune into Part 2, which is coming up soon.